everybody. What an honor I have to be sitting next to the Dean of Catholic Distance University, the famous, the great one, Dr. Pete Brown. Welcome, Pete.
Thank you, sir.
Ultimately, we want to
It's
talk
great
about
to be
something.
here.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, no, it's great to be here as well in your house. We're going to talk about something that everybody loves to talk about, which is the problem of evil. And here's the thing about this, and Pete is pretty much an expert in all of this.
I'm an expert in evil.
He's an
I'm
expert in
intimately
evil.
familiar with it.
Yeah, we are all, unfortunately. But there's a lot of people out there that misunderstand and that struggle with how could a God that is so good and loving allow for bad things to happen? And in this week, you're going to have the chance to explore this. There's some great articles that are going to be placed before you to investigate, read, soak in. Sometimes that will resolve the question, reading a good article, but sometimes it's a bit of a struggle still. And I'll share with you a couple of thoughts that I have that have made this topic a little bit more palatable. But at the end of the day, evil can be pretty disgusting, and it should be horrifying. And I think that's part of this that is worth talking about, is that when people talk about evil, if they sanitize it, it really does a disservice to who God is and the ultimate joy that we're called to.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's not just one problem with evil. There's many problems with evil, plural. And the reason that we have problems with evil, as Chris said, is that evil's a really bad thing. So in classical theology, that is theodicy, which is the art of sort of defending God, the focus of the problem of evil, the singular problem, one problem, is basically how to defend God. How to defend God's basic goodness, okay, his all-knowingness, his all-powerfulness, his omnipotence, in the face of a world in which there's evil. And the classic way of doing that is to really establish that evil is not a thing of itself, because everything that is in actuality ultimately depends on God for its existence. That would be Chris, that would be me, that would be this beer bottle, that would be this lovely little pretty statue. So everything that is in the world, including every new actuality, like moving this beer bottle from here to here, is something that God has known about from all eternity and has willed from all eternity to make a new actuality. Every actuality depends on God. So evil really can't be an actuality. Otherwise, God would be the direct cause of it, the ultimate cause of it. And so evil, in the classic definition, is understood as a privation. Okay, if I take away the full goodness that something should have, that is, the full goodness that an act should have, it's not sufficiently directed to God. It's not really having a good intention. It's not based on, something that's lacking. That's where the evil is going to come from. It's going to come in that lackingness. But the things that the action has are still remain to be good things, and therefore they can be traced back to God without God's own honor being diminished as the ultimate source of everything in the world that is.
Well, here's what I would say, though. The struggle with this is going to be the response that says, but why would God allow that privation? Why would God allow for this disorder to happen? You could easily say that maybe obviously it originates back at the fall. Okay, so everything was created good, and Adam was called to tend and to keep. But of course, the fall takes place. It's a massive in its impact. All the preternatural gifts are gone. They're severed from their life of God, and they go out and they have the consequences of sin.
Right.
Okay, fine, we get that. But it still seems such a severity to see how fast and how far the human person can stray from that original call to goodness. I mean, maybe it bespeaks the reality of the human person's propensity to implode.
Right. Right, and this is why I think the classic definition, while it will sort of work to defend the classic explanation of evil as a privation, works in the sense that it can defend, you can at a very metaphysical level defend God's ultimate goodness, his ultimate power, his ultimate knowingness, he has beings with free will, and he clearly allows these privations to happen, both physical evils, which we would call like an earthquake or hurricane. Those are evils in the way that we experience them, but they're not necessarily bad of themselves, because ultimately they're just sort of a natural process that happens to clash with our own natural processes of wanting to live. We want to live in a certain area, and the ocean and gravity are kind of doing their thing, and all of a sudden the plates shift in the earth, and there's a tectonic movement, and there's a big earthquake, and all of a sudden there's a tsunami wave. The earth is behaving the way it's supposed to behave, right? The gravity's behaving the way it's supposed to behave. The ocean behaves the way it's supposed to behave, and we're doing our thing, not necessarily doing anything wrong, minding our own business on the beach, and all of a sudden there's a tsunami wave that comes and wipes us all out. That's a natural evil, right? That's an evil in the sense of the way we experience it. There's also, a physical evil. This is an evil committed as opposed to an evil suffered. That would be like a murder, a rape, the Holocaust, the blood purges of Joseph Stalin, so anything like that. So those are really, really bad things, because the actions necessary to make those happen are lacking the full goodness that an action should have. It's not directed toward God. It's not completion. So it basically creates, in effect, a hole in creation, which ultimately leaves us all very unhappy. And it's horrible. And it's a horrible thing to experience. It has a profound existential reality, which is horrible in that we experience. And therefore, I think it's a little glib for believers in God to talk about evil as a problem that's solved. It's only solved in a very, very narrow intellectual way. And only when you're trying to defend God's honor, knowingness, all lovingness, all care. In other words, things like that. You can technically defend these things. You can let God off if you put him on trial. You can successfully defend him, but it doesn't really answer the question of why these things fundamentally happen.
What's interesting is that in a lot of ways, this bespeaks the freedom that the human person has, which is ultimately in its impact a little bit terrifying, because with this freedom, the human person has the opportunity to transform positively or negatively other human persons in such a way that it could impact the entirety of their life. Think about a small child that is abused, such a terrible and horrifying evil. That ability to have freedom given to that person literally changes a life forever, in which they may or may not recover. And I think that's where the struggle comes. Here's the thing, I think, is that for those who follow God and who have a relationship with him, they are, even in these moments that are so intense, having to lean back on the possibility that even though it's beyond our ability to understand and explain, God is still trustworthy. This is such an impossibility, I think, for many people that are outside of knowing God as a God who cares and a God who loves. Like, it's hard for them to come to the conclusion that God is trustworthy and that he cares if they have no understanding of the way that God has revealed himself over time. So I'm not sure how that theodicy works when it comes to people of different religions.
Right. I mean, there were a lot of Muslim people who were killed in the 2004 tsunami. I mean, it killed hundreds of thousands of people. A lot of them were Muslim, and of course they're faced with the same ultimate questions that we would be faced of why something like this actually happens. Why person X dies in the tsunami where another person survives? Why a tsunami happens in Asia but not in Africa? Why does it happen in Asia but not in North America? Why are these particular people chosen to be hit by the tsunami, not others? There's no answers to those questions, and the idea that even in Christianity you have answers to those questions is wrong. You don't have a solution to the problem of evil in that kind of a way. Or for that matter, why did God create the world this way, that this would happen? I mean, maybe it would have been possible for him to create a world that these things didn't have. I don't know. That natural evils in some ways, physical evils are in some ways harder to explain than moral ones, because moral ones can be traced ultimately to human actions, or maybe even angelic actions in the case of the devil who rebelled against God in classic Christian theology. You can understand the moral evils of someone like Genghis Khan or Hitler or Stalin or, even like Charles Manson, simply by seeing, these people are using their free will to, they're abusing their free will, they're abusing their very person, but they're using it to create privation, they're using it to kill or to harm others. So those are types of questions that really have no answer. I would say the only real answer is not even really an answer to the question that we typically have of why evil happens. Why do bad things happen to good people? But, okay, so that's one question. But you could also ask, well, why do good things happen to bad people? That's another question, right? I mean,
Well,
why do bad things happen to bad people? Good things happen to, in other words, it seems like, the distribution of goodness and badness is sort of a little bit, not completely related to the moral worth of the people who experience it. So why do these things happen? I don't really know, but I do know this, that God has dealt with the problem of evil in the death of Jesus Christ and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It shows, in other words, how God will ultimately deal with the problem of evil once and for all, a problem which emerged in history and will be solved only in history.
What's interesting is that Jesus himself alludes to the reality of this kind of sense of injustice and difficulty with people who are good or bad when he says, or we read in the Gospels, that the rain falls on the just and on the unjust.
Right.
And so there is this almost
the Tower of Siloam that falls down in Luke 13.
Exactly.
It falls on good people and bad people. They weren't any more unrighteous than other people.
Exactly.
And he doesn't say, do you think you're any more righteous than them because it didn't fall on you when it did fall on them? This is in Luke 13.
Yeah. And
he says, no, but he doesn't explain why it fell on them,
exactly
and not on person X, but not in person Y. But he says, unless you repent, you'll perish. So maybe that gives a little bit of a clue as to why bad things happen. One is maybe to underscore the fragility of life, so that you can ultimately see that, we're not here permanently, but only temporarily in this world. That might be something to that.
I think there's something about that this is not the ultimate home. What we do get and what we do know is that when we enter that beatific vision, the ultimate kind of culmination of this life here is that we will be in a place where there are no more tears and no more sufferings and difficulties. Like, that is going to be a place of the perpetual fullness of good and truth and beauty. Right now, we're not there. And, ultimately we could say from our understanding of Catholic theology that that's the ramifications, the impact of that original sin. I think that could be another important question. If Christ comes and he rescues us from the impact of that original sin with the life that we're given in God now, why do we still have to have the remnants of that sin in things like the difficulties that we experience in nature? Ultimately, even you could say, why do we have concupiscence? Like,
right.
Why that?
Well, that's a question I think we could answer, and that's a question that the medievals did answer. Are we actually punished for Adam's sin? Not exactly. It's more that we're missing the full life that Adam was supposed to have. So in other words, Adam had or was supposed to have the full life, the full complement of the gifts of life, not only the natural life that he had, but the supernatural life necessary to enjoy, eternity with God. And he lost that because of his sin, but ultimately, as a consequence of that loss, he's not able to pass that life on to his children because he doesn't have it. He can't give what he doesn't have.
No, that's a great insight.
And so that's the way it affects us. It's not that we're guilty for what Adam did. It's more that we live in a world in which, we're left with just a purely natural existence, which is unfortunately not what we need, not all that we need to reach our full end for which we're created. That's the way in which we're guilty for original sin. It's only a guilt by analogy. It's not a guilt by, it's not the same kind of guilt that Adam would have had for actually committing the sin.
Not the actual
nor
sin.
does it is the same kind of guilt that we would have for committing an actual sin.
Right.
As opposed to, it's more of a state that we have rather than a sin by commission.
I like the connection to, it's almost a connection to the loss of preternatural gifts. It's almost this idea that had he not sinned, this state of being in grace would be passed on from generation to generation. But this brings up a different kind of question, which maybe in the section when we looked at Adam and Eve we could
I think it's
connect
coming up
this
next
to.
lesson, or no? Is that, yeah?
It's right around.
Yeah.
It may in fact be right now. We're going to see where this should go, but the ultimate.
We're not really sure what's in the.
Yeah, the thing about this is that many have posited the idea that obviously because Eden was not the ultimate final stay, that there had to be that period of probation, which is, if you look at First Comes Love by Hahn in his 7th chapter, and some other people have posited that just as the angelic arena had that period of probation, so too the human person, that this is not meant to be our final testing and resting place. So it's this ultimate, will you serve? Will you obey? Will you submit to the word of God? And to the point, would you submit even to the point of death? And so I think that's interesting because what we're then given is not the ability to be in a place that is without an absence or that is entirely good, true, and beautiful. But now we're given, like our legacy is now we are the recipients of a lack. And that lack, both just spiritually and physically, are going to have an impact on us. And it's like we're all called now.
So if you want to say what original sin is, it's basically literally nothing, right? It's essentially being handed an empty glass where you really needed a full one, right?
Yeah.
And so you're what you're missing is the water that was supposed to be in that glass, but it's not the kind of thing you would see if you had the kind of spiritual X-ray machine to look at, a newborn baby's soul. When it's born, would you see something on the soul like from original sin as like a stain or a mark? No, you would simply see an empty glass. You'd see like something that really needs to be full, but in fact is empty. So the stain analogy is just that. It's only an analogy, and the classic phrase "stain of original sin" is a little misleading because people. Interpret this to mean, well, there must be something dirty about the baby that's being born. You got to wash them off or something like that. That's only an analogy. The classic phrase for stain is macula in Latin, and macula really means it's literally a dark spot. But darkness is, of course, what? It's the absence of light. Exactly. Yeah. When you don't have the light necessarily to light something up, darkness is the default condition. So that's just what you have, and so. Yeah, that's another way to think of baptism. It's illumination. It lights up something that's dark.
We have the candle at baptism, and
it's not even cleansing. It not much as an illumination, lightning. So that's another way to think of it.
I love the definition for original sin, sin, a deprivation of grace, that lack of the grace that we're needed to thrive. And I think that fits when we talk about the problem of evil. It's a deprivation of that which is good, true, beautiful, that kind of thing. It's worth wrestling with. I mean, I think if you talk to somebody who's been through great difficulties and struggles, that wrestling is going to continue. But ultimately, in the end, I think for us who follow Christ and have a relationship with Him, we're really resigning ourselves to trust. But I mean, I think this points to Jesus Himself. He has that question, Father, why have you forsaken me? There's something about that moment that's so human, that feeling of like, but God, where are you? I need you now. And I think that many people who have experienced suffering have that same prayer. God, where are you? I need you now. And so in some ways, it's a consolation to think that God in the flesh, Jesus Christ, experienced that very same feeling of ache and wondering, God, where are you in this moment? And so be at peace in some ways. The story's not done, and this is not our final home. And one day, I think many of our struggles will obviously be answered by that encounter with God in the beatific vision. So thanks for tuning in. Obviously, this is part of your course, but we hope you loved it. We kind of like talking about it, so...